Tell me a story about the movement of a people, the dream of a place. A story that lives for a moment, that lets you look with fresh eyes at this moment, that shines a light on your path across fields and farmlands, studios and stadiums. And as you look, you see that this moment rests on the shoulders of thousands of prairie wanderers and farmers and dreamers who dared to lift a plow or a pen or a paintbrush to make their mark on their moment. Did those prairie wanderers get it right? What dreams did they dream? We tell each other stories, tall tales around campfires and TVs, stories that inspire questions about what it means to be human, stories of struggling to be seen when you're invisible, stories of rivers and harvests and fast cars and new life, of conversations and ideas that burn bright against the wide-open night sky. Maybe it's time we hear each other's stories and let our conversations go where they go. And maybe your ideas will mix with my ideas, and that'll spark new ideas, bigger, better, bolder ideas that make us somehow see that the moments we create are the moments we need the most. And that is the big idea. A big, moving idea that we'll chase together across front porches and neighborhoods and across the prairie if we have to get at it. The why, who, and how, the crafting of culture, the pursuit of happiness. Because we all want a better moment, right? A better moment for every child, every newcomer, every old-timer. Well, that takes a whole lot of stories, a whole amber wave of them. So, what's your story? What do you think about humans being human? Because maybe from your story and our conversations and those ideas, we'll help a neighbor next time, or we'll start something in town, or we'll vote next time, so that we can create a new moment, a bigger, better, bolder moment. Tell me a story. Because stories carry our culture, and ideas change the world.
Good evening. I'm Misty Serene, the Executive Director of the Salina Arts Center. And if I can't be at the Arts Center tonight, I don't think there's any place I'd rather be than right here in the beautiful, historic Stiefel Theater. On behalf of Salina Arts and Humanities, the Arts Center, and the Historic Theater, I'm happy and proud to welcome each of you to Salina, Kansas. The three organizations that I just mentioned are part of what makes up a very large and strong cultural core of amazing organizations in our community. We are grateful that Humanities Kansas recognized Salina's commitment to the arts and our beautiful centralized location to bring the National Poet Laureate to Kansas. Thank you for sharing this experience with us tonight. Our guide on tonight's journey is no stranger to using her words to connect communities and people. She is a professor of creative writing at Kansas State and is currently serving as the Poet Laureate of Kansas. Please help me welcome Tracy Brimhall.
Just that. Good evening. One of the first things that I ever learned about poetry was about how often attention was kin to prayer. That is a lesson I see so often in the work of Ada Limón. She deeply sees and names the plants, the animals, and the griefs and kindnesses of the world. In her poem Sanctuary, she states that she's been, quote, tricked into believing I could be both an I and the world, to be swallowed by being seen, end quote. That's the kind of wholeness I think a lot of people yearn for, a self that is at one with the world around us. She is a watcher who shows readers the appetite of her eye, quote, to be made whole by being not a witness, but witnessed. Ada Limón is the author of 6 collections of poetry, most recently The Hurting Kind. Her books have received numerous accolades, including winning the National Book Critics Circle Award, being named a finalist for the National Book Award and the Kingsley Tufts Award, and receiving a Guggenheim Fellowship. Her poems have appeared in countless esteemed publications, such as The New Yorker, The New York Times, and the American Poetry Review. But more importantly, her work has touched the minds and hearts of thousands of poetry readers, as well as the stars. One of her poems, In Praise of Mystery, a Poem for Europa, is engraved on NASA's Europa Clipper that was just launched 3 days ago on October 14th and will be orbiting Jupiter in 2030. It was partially the inspiration for tonight's event for our state with so many astronauts and stargazers. Limón's mother is also an artist and who is responsible for many of the book covers, the art on her books that you'll see out there in the lobby. She grew up in Sonoma, California, and now splits her time between Lexington, Kentucky, and Sonoma. She's the 24th Poet Laureate of the United States and the first Latina to serve in that role. As laureate, one of her main projects has been You Are Here, Poetry in the Natural World, an anthology of place-based writing. And some of those poems have also been carved into park benches for national parks across the United States. In NPR's review of her latest collection, The Hurting Kind, the reviewer Javika Verma said that the book, quote, asks for our attention to stay tender. This is why I return to poems, this reminder that the world opens itself under attention. The Hurting Kind's final poem, The End of Poetry, is a long list of images, quotes, Osseous and chickadee and sunflower and snowshoes, maples and eyes, Samara and shoot, end quote. But Limón says enough to all of it. The whole poem is a single long sentence that calls for an end of that devotion to the eye and seeks for a different kind of attention, for a different sense to open. Quote, enough sorrow, enough of the air and its ease. I am asking you to touch me. Touch is another way of being intimate with the world and intimate with each other. It's also something I think that language can do. It can hold us, soothe us. It helps keep us in our bodies. It also helps us keep falling back in love with the world and the stars beyond it. Please help me give a big Kansas welcome to the Poet Laureate of the United States, Ada Limón.
Hello. So good to be here. I always have a great time in Kansas. I'm not making that up. I really do. I always have a great time in Kansas. So it's just such a pleasure to be back. And just so you know, I am standing on a box. I'm not this tall. But I was afraid that maybe if someone sat in the front row, they would not be able to see me. So, thus the box. And what I thought I would do is talk a little bit about, I would read some poems, but then also talk about the poem that just this Monday was launched into space, which sounds like I'm a pathological liar when I say that out loud. But what I thought I would start with is, as I think about the public poem, the idea of poems for a wider audience, not just the private poem, I put together like a small collection of poems that I think of as public poems that I've written. And so I thought it might be interesting to think about those, and then we sort of lead to this last public poem, which is the poem for space. And again, it's such a pleasure to be here. How are you guys doing? Are you good? I've never been to Salina. I've been to lots of parts of Kansas, but I've never been here. So this is it's such a cute little town. I love it. So I'm going to start with the first poem that, if you can say a poem goes viral, I don't know if that's something that I even want to put into my vocabulary, but this was a poem that just sort of traveled and had a mind of its own. And it's a poem that I wrote about horses. How to triumph like a girl. I like the lady horses best. How they make it all look easy. Like running 40 miles per hour is as fun as taking a nap. Or grass. I like their lady horse swagger after winning. Ears up, girls, ears up. But mainly, let's be honest, I like that they're ladies. As if this big, dangerous animal is also a part of me. That somewhere inside the delicate skin of my body, there pumps an 8-pound female horse heart. Giant with power, heavy with blood. Don't you want to believe it? Don't you want to lift my shirt and see the huge, beating, genius machine that thinks, no, it knows it's going to come in first? That was a poem that just sort of traveled. It traveled around. It still does. I'm very proud to say that it has made the circuit in the Youth Speaks organizations that do a lot of Poetry Out Loud events. And I get to see all of these young people do that poem, and that makes me really excited. And I just found out, I think this is official, I think I'm allowed to announce it, that it's going to be turned into a children's book. So I'm very excited about it. I thought the next poem I would read is a poem that was someone had asked me at the Academy of American Poetry to write the first poem for the new year, like the poem that would go out on January 1st. And the year was, I think it was 2015. I think that's right. And so I was trying to find out, how do you write a poem that somehow exemplifies the year, gives you some kind of hope, but also isn't turning an eye to what's going on in the world. Can you guys hear me? Is the mic a little funny? What if I do it right there? Still echoey? Yeah? Okay, good. So this is the poem I came up with, and it's called Because She Likes Being in Poems. My dog is in here. It's called The Leash. After the birthing of bombs, of forks and fear, the frantic automatic weapons unleashed, the spray of bullets into a crowd holding hands, that brute sky opening in a slate metal maw that swallows only the unsayable in each of us, what's left? Even the hidden nowhere river is poisoned, orange and acidic by a coal mine. How can you not fear humanity? Want to lick the creek bottom dry, to suck the deadly water up into your own lungs like venom? Reader, I want to say, don't die. Even when silvery fish after fish comes back belly up and the country plummets into a crepitating crater of hatred, isn't there still something singing? The truth is, I don't know. But sometimes I swear I hear it. The wound closing over like a rusted over garage door. And I can still move my limbs into the world without too much pain. Can still marvel at how the dog runs straight toward the pickup trucks, breaknecking down the road because she thinks she loves them. Because she's sure, without a doubt, that the loud roaring things will love her back. Her soft, small self alive with desire to share her goddamn enthusiasm. Until I yank the leash back to save her, because I want her to survive forever. Don't die, I say. And we decide to walk for a bit longer. Starlings high and fevered above us, winter coming to lay her cold corpse down upon this little plot of earth. Perhaps we are always hurtling our body towards the thing that will obliterate us, begging for love from the speeding passage of time. And so maybe, like the dog, obedient at my heels, we can walk together, peacefully, at least until the next truck comes. She does like being in poems. She's 13 now, and she still really likes being in poems. This is a poem that was another sort of public poem, and a poem that, for me, I thought of as an apocalyptic love poem. But I've decided that poets are not allowed to use the word apocalypse anymore. Because we just can't will it into being. So let's just say it's a love poem. The conditional. Say tomorrow doesn't come. Say the moon becomes an icy pit. Say the sweet gum tree is petrified. Say the sun's a foul black tire fire. Say the owl's eyes are pinpricks. Say the raccoon's a hot tar stain. Say the shirt's plastic ditch litter. Say the kitchen's a cow's corpse. Say we never get to see it. Bright future, stuck like a bum star, never coming close, never dazzling. Say we never meet her, never him. Say we spend our last moments together, hands knotted together, clutching the dog, watching the sky burn. Say it doesn't matter. Say that would be enough. Say you'd still want this. Us, alive, right here, feeling lucky. I think it's important to feel lucky. Think about all the alternatives. This is the next poem that I thought of as a public poem, as a poem for more than just a personal beloved. I write a lot of intimate poems that are just literal poems that I write and then send to my dad and go, this one's for you. Or to my mom and say, this one's for you. And so these are, the poems where I'm thinking of an audience in a different way, not just a small fistful of people that I let read early drafts. And this is a poem that I will say, when I wrote it, I thought, if I publish this poem, I will never become the Poet Laureate of the United States. But Dr. Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress, who is a fantastic human being, this is one of her favorite poems. And I wanted to shout out to one of the English teachers I met earlier this evening because she said her students love this poem. So hopefully she and her students are here. A new national anthem. The truth is, I've never cared for the national anthem. If you think about it, it's not a good song. It's too high for most of us, with the rocket's red glare. And then there are the bombs. Always, always, there is war and bombs. Once I sang it at homecoming and threw even the tenacious high school band off key. But the song didn't mean anything, just a call to the field before the pummeling of youth. And what of the stanzas we never sing? The third that mentions no refuge could save the hireling or the slave. Perhaps the truth is that every song of this country has an unsung third stanza. Something brutal, snaking underneath us as we absent-mindedly sing the high notes with the beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. Don't get me wrong. I do like the flag, how it undulates in the wind like water, elemental and best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything, when it's not a weapon, when it flickers, when it folds up so perfectly you can keep it until it's needed, until you can love it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance. A song where the notes are sung by even the ageless woods, the short grass plains, the Red River Gorge, the fistful of land left unpoisoned, the song that's our birthright, that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on, that sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's, that sounds like a match being lit in the endless cave, the song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones, and isn't that enough? The true story, I really did butcher that song at homecoming in my hometown, which is tomorrow night. Unfortunately, I think I'll be home for it, so I might have to go. They will not ask me to sing. This next poem it's another public poem. And I think of this poem as I actually thought of it very much as a private poem when I wrote it. It was a poem I needed for myself to heal me. And now it has a mind of its own. It's a lot of different places. And there's a TV show called The Good Doctor. And they had a beautiful episode where they used the entire poem. And a woman who was sick was reading it to soothe herself. And the voiceover goes throughout the whole episode. I was really quite moved by it. And I can't tell you how often this poem, people will ask if they can hang it in a doctor's office or in some place where hope is needed. And I think, isn't that everywhere? Don't we need it so much? But I did not write it with a wider audience in mind. I wrote it for myself on a particularly hard day. To know me is to know that I don't like winter. Enough so that for a while I couldn't even like fall because I knew what was coming. But now, I'm starting to like fall again. But this is a spring poem that I wrote after surviving the winter. Instructions on not giving up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crab apple tree, more than the neighbor's almost obscene display of cherry limbs, shoving their cotton candied colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains. It's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets leave the pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come, patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us, a return to the strange idea of continuous living, despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it. The tree seems to say, a new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all. So I'm just going to read two more, and then I'm going to get into the sort of story of this poem that went to space, and we'll talk about that, and I'll read it for you. I don't say yes to a lot of, we call them commissions in poetry, but you don't get paid for them. But, you know, an ask for an occasional poem. It's just a very, very difficult thing to do. It's marvelous, and people who do it well, kudos to them. But it's very hard. And so I've said no to a lot of beautiful projects I would have loved to have been part of, but I just know myself and that I would agonize and then fail. But I was asked by the writer Rick Bass, who's a wonderful, wonderful writer and a naturalist, to visit the Kootenai National Forest in Montana and visit an ancient forest that is in threat of being logged, and to see if I could come up with a poem. He just is kind of one of those guys, you know the guy who's like, he's just very Montana, you know? He said to me at one point, you don't end up here because things went well back there. And I'm like, that's a good way to describe Montana. But he's so in love with these trees, and he took me into this magical forest, and I wrote this poem. The Origin Revisited. After a visit to the Yak Valley in the Kootenai National Forest, Montana, where the U.S. Forest Service has announced a logging project called Black Ram. What is there to be done now but enter against abandonment, become a hollow sound in the halo of labyrinthine green, to become a crossed out word on the back of someone's hand? Once all of this became all of this. One not yet golden western larch curves by a white pine curves by a western hemlock. No one here is heroic. To enter here is to enter magnitude, to feel an ecstatic somethingness, a nothingness of your own name. All words become wrong. A whole world exists without us, but who is us? Lichen, moss, grizzly scat, moose hoof print like 2 exclamation points on the drying frog pond. How do you know you're alive? What evidence will you leave? So many myths are unraveling. A yellow swallowtail glides by over a sinless creek bed. A storm wets the skin, and we are surprised we have skin. Woods rose, white-flowered rhododendron. Nothing here is unfinished. What it gave me? I saw a new tree emerge out of a ground made of ancient trees, on top of more ancient trees, on top of more ancient trees, on top of more ancient trees, and understood then that this was how the earth was made. And then I was asked, I should say, by the way, I did not know that it was totally grizzly habitat until I was already there. And at one point they were like, so have you ever hiked with grizzlies before? And I was like, no. What? I'm just the poet. But we were okay. And then I was asked by, the other thing I said yes to was, I was asked by the National Climate Assessment folks, which is a congressional mandate, to make a report on how we're doing as a country in terms of the climate and what's changing. If imagine you study the Chesapeake Bay, your entire chapter would just be on Chesapeake Bay. So this is a massive, amazing, incredible report. And it came out a year ago, and they asked me, or tasked me, to write an original poem that would go in the front matter of this report. And I got to meet all these wonderful scientists and writers and thinkers. And after I left the room, one woman followed me out. She was a younger scientist, younger than me, and I just said younger than me like that was impossible. She was younger than me, if you can imagine. And she was crying, and she said, I know you have to write this poem, but please, whatever you do, don't make it nostalgic. So this is the poem, and it's for her. Startlement. It is a forgotten pleasure. The pleasure of the unexpected blue-bellied lizard skittering off his sunspot rock, the flicker of an unknown bird by the bus stop. To think perhaps we are not distinguishable and therefore no loneliness can exist here. Species to species in the same blue air, smoke, wing flutter buzzing, a car horn coming, so many unknown languages. To think we have only honored this strange human tongue. If you sit by a riverside, you see a culmination of all things upstream. We know now we were never at the circle's center. Instead, all around us, something is living or trying to live. The world says, what we are becoming together. The world says one type of dream has ended, but another has just begun. The world says, once we were separate, and now we must move in unison. Thank you. How are you guys doing? Great. Good. So I want to tell you a little bit about this project, which is I had just said no to a commission. It was for a very large sporting event. And I think it was hard to say. It was very hard for my husband that I said no. But a week after I had said no to that, we got an email from Bert from NASA. The email, the first line was like, hey, it's Bert from NASA here. I was like, this is the most amazing way to start any email. And I was at the Library of Congress, and the email asked if I would write an original poem that would be engraved on the spacecraft, the Europa Clipper, that would then be launched into space and go almost to 1.8 billion miles to the second moon of Jupiter, Europa, which is an icy moon that they believe has all of the ingredients for life. It is not necessarily a life-finding mission, but most of the scientists believe that something might be interesting up there. I have always loved the stars. I've always loved the planets. I've also loved Star Trek and Star Wars. And here I was on this Zoom call with NASA, and I immediately said yes, and then hung up the phone, or we hung up the call, and my whole team at the Library of Congress was like, "This is amazing. You're going to write a poem for space." And I was like, and then I suddenly couldn't breathe at all. And I was having this panic attack, and I thought, oh, how am I supposed to write a poem for space? And how am I supposed to write a poem for this project? And so what I did was, of course, I spent all this time researching Europa. And if you know poets, you know that we love to be distracted by research. And maybe you're that same way. Maybe you're an artist and you understand that you're like, oh yeah, before I start this novel, let me find out everything there is about this kind of apple farming. It's this glorious type of procrastination, which we also call learning. But NASA had sent me so many things, and I thought, oh, I'm going to read them all. I'm going to figure this out, how to write this poem. And I was lucky enough that at the time I had 2 weeks off in Maui at the Merwin Conservancy, which is the home of a previous poet laureate, W.S. Merwin, who passed away a few years ago, and his home has become a writing solace place. And it's near, I'm not making this up, the town of Haiku. I went there, and all I did was write many, many terrible drafts of this poem. And my husband, after hearing me read him the 18th draft, I think, said, I think you need to stop writing a NASA poem and start writing a poem you would actually write. And I was like running out of the room before he even finished talking, because I knew exactly what he meant. And what happened was I was trying to write a poem without the we. And I was trying to write a poem for Europa. But what do I know about Europa? The poem I wrote is a poem for us. Because every NASA scientist you speak to, and at this point I've actually met quite a few of them, will say that this planet is the best planet. And so this is the poem that on Monday at 12:06 was launched into space. It has already passed the moon. It will, by February, reach Mars, and you can track it and see where it goes. And it will not reach the orbit of Europa until almost 6 years from now. So if you want to follow along to its journey, it's kind of fun to think. I like to manifest on a full moon so we can think of the beautiful things we might do, the small kindnesses we might give each other. Maybe you'll be graduating from high school. Maybe you'll be graduating from college. Maybe you'll have just published your first book or your second. Maybe you'll have fallen in love. Maybe the planet will be in some, what if we could imagine in a better shape? We're not allowed to imagine that, but let's do that. 6 years. We could get a lot done. In praise of mystery. Arching under the night sky, inky with black expansiveness, we point to the planets we know. We pin quick wishes on stars. From Earth, we read the sky as if it is an unerring book of the universe, expert and evident. Still, there are mysteries below our sky. The whale song, the songbird singing its call in the bough of a wind-shaken tree. We are creatures of constant awe, curious at beauty, at leaf and blossom, sun and shadow, grief and pleasure. And it is not darkness that unites us, not the cold distance of space, but the offering of water. Each drop of rain, each rivulet, each pulse, each vein, oh second moon, we too are made of water, of vast and beckoning seas. We too are made of wonders, of great and ordinary loves, of small, invisible worlds, of a need to call out through the dark. After I wrote the poem and submitted it to NASA, my wonderful agent, whose birthday was yesterday, said, I think we should turn it into a picture book, but it's got to come out by the launch. And we started having these conversations last summer, 2 summers ago. So we were meeting with all these people, and they said, oh, well, we could get the book out by the launch, but we'd never be able to find a really great illustrator who could work that fast. And then Norton came to us and said, we have Peter Cease, and he's interested. Now, if you know Peter Cease, he's a remarkable, remarkable illustrator. And he had been working on a project that apparently was kind of bumming him out. And he got this poem, and he said, I want to do something with it. And I wrote my poem by hand, and it's in my handwriting on the spacecraft. And one of the things I love about his artwork is that he actually brings his art, his actual paintings that he makes, puts them in a portfolio, and takes the train into New York City and brings them to the office where everyone stands around and looks at them. And so we had immediately said, yes, of course, please make this happen. And then somehow they brought this book into the world on October 2nd, so right before the launch. And I was able to give it to the Clipper team just on Monday. I keep thinking that was a long time ago. That was just Monday. And the illustrations are incredible. And I just want to say, you know, when someone, they think, oh, how, look at this is the whale song. Every spread is just gorgeous. And I got to meet him for the first time last week. We'd met via Zoom. And it was just a remarkable meeting. And we kept talking about how even though the spacecraft is now gone, well, not gone, but it is doing its thing, this is here for us. So, yeah, I just wanted to give him a special shout out because he did such a beautiful job. Thank you. And now I think we have this beautiful little setup where I get to be in the hot seat, and I'll answer or evade any of the questions that you have written for me. So thank you again. And now we're over here. It's a whole new setting.
Super cute chairs. So I want to thank everyone who submitted questions ahead of time. We had a little box out there for submitting questions. And so I've put them in sort of an order, a little journey for us as we answer some questions. So that was such a beautiful reading, Ada. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love getting to do this with you. Also, I feel like people asked a lot of questions that I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Except for this one. This one was a surprise, and we're just going to start with this one. What cheese do you like?
Which?
Cheese.
Oh,
Yeah.
You guys, this is a great question. But we're not going to have enough time. So I'm from Sonoma, California, and there's a lot of cheese. But I will say the dry jack from Sonoma Bella is my favorite. Yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think you read some just amazing poems tonight that maybe some people were taught by their teachers in high school. I know we were talking to some high school teachers before this, or people have encountered your poems in other ways, and they've probably just like I have when I read your work, just had the world opened to them by seeing how somebody else sees and experiences the world. But I guess we all want to know, what poem do you remember opening the world to you? Is that a poem from childhood, or just last week you've reevaluated your...
Yeah. I think there's two that come to mind, and one is the poem by Elizabeth Bishop called One Art, which I'm sure many people know quite well, but it's the art of losing isn't hard to master. Do something every day. You know, it's like this whole beautiful list of things that are lost. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my next to last 3 loved houses, went. And it goes and this builds and builds and builds until you get to the last stanza, and it's, of course, to a you. And I'm a sucker for the you. I'm a romantic. And so the last line is, even losing you, and you're like, oh, of course, this whole poem is a love poem. It wasn't until much later in my life that I realized that not only is it a love poem, it was a successful love poem because the person it was for came back after they got that poem.
So good. That reminds me that I heard that the second thing that poems were invented for was to praise. The first was to curse. But I love the idea of a poem as a spell, and you could bring somebody back to you. So poems open the world to you, but when did you feel poetry could be a way of life for you? When was that moment for you?
I think I'm still figuring that out. I think I'm still figuring it. I think that I earnestly love poetry so much, and I think there has been and continues to be this sort of wonder at how one does it, because I never really know how I write a poem, and I'm always sort of confounded that I'm making a living at all. In fact, I had worked for a wonderful boss one time when I was working at Travel and Leisure magazine, and we had a little retreat, and I, of course, had gone and written a poem. And she was like, oh, you wrote a poem, and she put her hands on my cheek, and she said, someone should just put you in a tower and feed you food and pay for you and your poems. And I was like, yes. I had never felt more seen. I was like, yes, Pamela Norwood, you know my soul. So I think I'm still trying to find my way into making sure that I'm writing, because writing is the only way I stay sane. And then also being a good person and a good partner and a good friend and showing up in the world in a way that is both of service and as a steward. And I think those things are always sort of circling. And I think my mantra is I'm doing my best. But yeah, so I think I'm still trying. But I don't think that it really opened to me until I was probably in my 20s, where I realized that maybe there was a possibility of being a writer.
I love that. You talked a little bit about like doing the research to write the poem for Europa, and then being like, oh, writing for Here on Earth. People asked questions about the importance of choosing certain animals in the poem, or the role of editing in writing a poem. I know that process can always change, but how much consideration do you think about for the research you're doing, which animal you're putting in, or does the process sort of feel different most of the time for you as you write.
Yeah, every single time it's different, and sometimes the process will win over. Sometimes there's something I found out reading about something that I'm like, well, this is now what the poem is about, which I didn't know before. Or there's no research, and I just have to, really name the things that I'm experiencing or witnessing. So I think every poem is different. Very rarely do they come out fully formed. One of the only poems that I can really say that came out in one sitting, which was How to Triumph Like a Girl. It came out so fast that I was sure it wasn't done, and my friend Adam Clay kept being like, no, don't mess with it, it's done. And I'm so grateful for him, because I'm sure I would have just deleted the whole thing. But so it's very rare for me to just go, oh, there's a poem, but that's one of them that did that.
I love that, because one of the pieces of that question, because there were some answers or the questions that rhymed a little bit, they seemed to be asking something similar, was the role of a good editor. And I love that it's the role of a good friend, a good reader, a good listener, who can sometimes let can listen to you well and say,
Yeah. And, I think that we were all very self-critical. I had a great designer friend one time who said, she didn't like to finish designs too far ahead of time, because it's like if you get ready too early to go out, and then you just keep going back and be like, is this what I want to wear? Is this right? But I love that sort of metaphor of, the idea that sometimes we need that pressure of like, this is just an ending. This is ready. I'm ready to send it. And the friend and the editor can be that sort of deadline of just like, I'm just going to send it to a friend.
Yes, and letting someone see you in that early stage and see it. One of my favorite poetry stories of all time was the story of Li Po writing poems and then reading them to the woman washing his clothes in the stream, and then he would fold the poem into a boat and set it into the river. And what I loved about it the first time I heard it was that the act of creation was all you needed, and then you could let it go. And then I realized you need your listener. The poem is supposed to be heard or received on the other end in some way, whether that's just the friend through email. But somebody asked, how does it feel to know that someone or something from across the galaxy could read your poem? But I also would like to turn that to, what about, how do you feel about, you mentioned that these are the public poems, and that framed a lot of the reading.
Yeah.
But the sense of being read, how does that, to be received by friends and strangers and something intelligent out there in the stars?
Yeah, I think that in order to write anything, I sometimes have to visualize that no one will ever read it. And that I'll just think, this is just for myself. This is just in my journal. It's one of the reasons I write longhand, because it can feel like note-taking. And one of the things with In Praise of Mystery is that it really was one of the poems where I knew I had to say we. And when I trusted that poem was because it actually, at some moment, it didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. It felt like it belonged to all of us. It really did. And it felt like it wasn't just speaking for, the United States, but it was speaking for every living being on Earth, including trees and plants and animals. And that was the poem where I was like, oh, I can actually dissolve myself out of it. And that's when I knew that poem was done, was that it wasn't about so much connecting with a readership, but that it was like, if someone to read this out there, they would know how much we care about our planet. And I think that was important to me. And then if we were to read it here, that it might turn us to everyday wonders. We're talking about the comet right now, and this incredible full moon, and all of these things that sometimes we lose sight of because our to-do list and our lives are heavy and hard and busy. And if the poem could let one person have one little moment of awe in their day, that would be a remarkable, remarkable thing for me.
I love that. we had another set of questions that kind of rhymed with each other. So I was interested in the ways in which they were similar, but also asking different things, which were, what do you find most rewarding as a poet? What experiences are most meaningful? But also, what has been your favorite experience as laureate, or something surprising about laureateship? Because it struck me that I think those are separate questions about like what's rewarding about being a poet and what's rewarding about being a laureate, because while of course those things are united, also being a poet is a different experience than being a laureate, a public arts advocate. So maybe you think it is the same thing, but I offer you that set of questions about what has been rewarding or surprising as a writer, as a poet, and also as laureate. Serving in that role?
I mean, I think it's a wonderful question, and I think, and I do think they're two different things. As a writer and an artist, the most satisfying thing I can do is to make something. The making of something is the most fun. I can't tell you where I go. I love it. I was once making a poem, and I went downstairs and I had to make myself some food or a snack, I can't remember. And I came back in and I said, "Man, what was I listening to?" I had a podcast on or a radio, something was on. And I realized, oh no, I was just listening to the poem. I was listening to the voice in my head. But it was I had gotten so quiet and it was so loud that I could hear it. And I was like, that is almost a spiritual experience. And I think that poetry every day has allowed me to recommit and reconnect to the universe in a way that saves me every single second. And it humbles me. And then the second half of that question of being the United States Poet Laureate, there's a level in which your public position has gone to like, oh, now I'm speaking at this White House event, or now I'm doing this thing here. And, the spacecraft launch, I read it to the team, at the NASA team, I got presented the vault plate that goes on the spacecraft in my own handwriting. And I'm sitting with these scientists and thinking, what is this? And so this feels on some level ceremonial and beautiful. And those things have been really wonderful. But the biggest thing that has been the most satisfying has been meeting all of these people who are so passionate about stewarding this world in different ways. The National Parks Project has allowed me to meet all of these incredible park rangers, both at the national level and at the parks level, that are working to put poems in parks and their education programs, and the amount that they care about these sacred spaces feels extraordinary. And the same thing with the NASA team, it's meeting these people that care so much about this earth and even what's beyond it, that has been really moving to me and really, really satisfying.
I love that. Well, somebody did ask if there is a favorite line from that poem. Is there a line that people come up to you and respond to a lot, or if you have your own personal favorite line within the poem?
I think it changes depending on what I need, I think there's some times where I feel like I really need the whale song, But I think that the line that was with the poem from the very beginning, from the very first meeting, which happened 2 years ago, October 14th, the day of the launch, was that I wrote down, "We too are made of water." Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is one of my favorite lines. And the whole Clipper team, everyone who works in the clean room to build the spacecraft, got T-shirts made, and the Clipper logo is on the front, and on the back, in my handwriting, it says, "We too are made of water."
That's really beautiful.
And so that's been really, really moving to see that line became a mantra about their mission and why they want to connect so much with this moon, with this second moon of Jupiter.
It's so beautiful. They did also say, P.S., thank you for coming to Salina. And did
Oh,
a smiley face.
And a face, a happy face.
Yeah, got a smiley face. So you spoke a bit about this as you were talking about the poem, but the question was, how do you choose your laureate projects, or do they choose you? And it sounds like sometimes the emails come in and it's like, hey, we're NASA, what's up?
Yeah.
And other times, like with the National Parks Project, did you go in pursuit of that one? Or, yeah, how do those opportunities arise, or are you going in pursuit of those?
I think of this, my signature project, as just being You Are Here, and these being these ancillary projects. They're just separate projects, but the You Are Here, I knew that I wanted to do something that was poetry in the natural world. And of course, being me, I just got really ambitious and decided, I was like, we'll have the national parks included. We'll go to 7 different national parks to represent the many different regions of the national parks. We'll unveil picnic tables, and we'll work with all these partnerships. And I will tell you that this meant almost weekly Zooms with like 65 people on them. And me being like, oh, remember when I had that idea? And I was like, we should just do that. That'll be fun. And then I had the anthology that would answer, because I kept thinking the National Parks Project feels so intentional, like it's an intentional nature. And so I wanted there to be a counterbalance, which were the poems in an anthology that really speak to the dailiness of nature, the nature that we encounter all the time, but also how nature has shifted, and our idea of nature is different at this moment in time. And so the national parks and then the anthology called You Are Here both had to sort of counterbalance one another. So sometimes what happens for me is I start with one project and think, this would be great. And then I was like, but don't we need something else that speaks to this other part of nature? And so, I think that at some point they say, okay, stop. Stop with all the ideas. But we've launched an incredible project, and it's been really beautiful. And you have a poem in the anthology, a gorgeous poem.
Thank you. So you talked about, I was thinking about 6 years, and what will I say is different in 6 years? What are the ways we'll acknowledge the passing of that 6-year moment and the discoveries we're about to encounter? And I think it speaks really well to this really beautiful question that was submitted, that is our final question tonight, which is, what role do you see poetry playing in the future?
I think that poetry has a lot of different ways that it can affect us and move us, whether it's the writing of it or the hearing of it, or the reading of it. But I think that one of its biggest gifts is that it can allow us to express emotions. And I think we live in a world where we feel separate from our feelings, and we often have to go to a movie or a book to cry. And I think that poetry right now is having such a great resurgence, as we know it's really just having a beautiful moment. And I would love for people to not just read more of it, but also listen to more of it and read, and to write it themselves, because there's so much power in the private poem, to just write a poem for yourself. But I think the biggest thing that it can do, and I hope it does more of, is to remind us that we are feeling people, and that when we bottle up our feelings, it's not good. So poetry allows us to experience the full spectrum of human emotion, and in doing so, we become kinder to ourselves and kinder to one another.
Thank you, Ada, so very much. And thank you to all of you for sharing your evening with poetry. I believe with both the in-person crowd and online, there's over 500 people who registered to be a part of the event tonight. What an incredible honor to have Ada with us, celebrating the new book, the children's book, the launching of Europa. And thank you again to Humanities Kansas, Salina Arts Center, Salina Arts and Humanities, Red Fern Booksellers, and the Stiefel Theater for helping make this night so incredibly special. If you would like to get a copy of The Hurting Kind or In Praise of Mystery, those are available for purchase in the Watson Room right outside. And Ada will be available to sign those books out there. And also, when you came in tonight, you probably did not know that you were going to get a special gift at the end of the evening. Humanities Kansas has a special gift as you exit. They will be handing those out. Please feel free to wait in line to have your book signed by Ada. And thank you again so much for celebrating the stars with us at Astra.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out.